when Bernie says the Washington Post doesn't like him, he's not insane. All of these media organizations start to attack him immediately after he said that, but the fact of the matter is Washington Post does pretty shady stuff when that person's name is Bernie Sanders. They even republish stories attacking Sanders. You don't believe me? Take a look at this. Bernie, your moment is past. Here's another one. Bernie Sanders is just another one-hit wonder. They're literally republishing stories. Bernie Sanders is no big deal second time around. Washington Post. Washington Post fact-checks Sanders. Sanders makes the point that says 500,000 bankruptcies a year occur from medical bills. Washington Post fact-checks that as flawed. However, Washington Post, who fact-checked that as false, apparently wasn't looking at the same Washington Post that said it was true. They wanted to attack him so bad that they didn't even check with their own paper to see if there's some kind of contradiction between what you're fact-checking as false that your paper is literally saying is true. Let's talk about it. It gets worse. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you like this content, find yourself coming back here often, please like this video, share, and of course, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal Patreon, and it helps. I mean, the show is brought to you by you, so I'm not going to keep this one long, but I try to point out ludicrous things that are not right, things that are kind of off kilter with reality as it pertains to certain media organizations that have a tendency to claw and attack Sanders while simultaneously say they are not doing just that. Bring in the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post has had a tortured relationship with one Bernie Sanders. Jeff Bezos owns them, and I strongly suspect that the people who are there accrue themselves to their new master. At which point, they attack him relentlessly because Sanders attacks Bezos relentlessly. Or maybe this is an issue of class. Sanders doesn't represent the class of the Washington Post, ergo the attacks. Whatever the reason, let's just admit that they happen. So comically, criminally out of touch with reality that they will do a fact check by which they get it wrong because their own paper said it was true. Sanders, on his campaign stump, often says 500,000 people each year file for bankruptcies because of medical bills. That is true. Sanders is relying on his study in a medical journal to use that. 66% of people who file bankruptcies accrue and say it has something to do with medical bills. Now, Sanders could have even taken that number higher because the actual number is like 530,000. The newspaper, fact check team, calls the author of the study. The author of the study says, yes, it's true, and walks him through it. And somehow, despite him doing that, he still comes away with 3 Pinocchios. It's astonishing. It just seems like they were trying at their best to attack him. The Rolling Stones covered this. So right here, Sanders told the Post that the Vermont senator was relying on an estimate published in a medical journal that found 66.5% of bankruptcies filers filed either medical bills or missed work due to illness as reasons they went broke. The journal itself said this was equivalent to about 530,000 bankruptcies each year. That means it's true. That means there should have been no Pinocchios. At first glance, it appears Bernie's underestimated the problem by rounding. The checker did an admirable thing and reached out to the author of the study. Dr. David Himmelston, a professor of public health at CUNY System and lecturer at Harvard Medical School, when asked Himmelston whether Sanders was quoting his study accurately, the fact checker reports he said yes. He said yes. He's quoting me accurately. But the fact checker is not satisfied with the author of the study that Bernie Sanders is citing as saying, yes, he's quoting me accurately. Perhaps he's rounding down too low, meaning he's underestimating the problem. But yes, what he's saying is accurate. The fact checker still comes away with that and prints this. Yes, I'm pausing. I want the gravity of the nonsense to be felt through absence, because there's no other way I can communicate to you how ludicrous this is. I mean, is it intentional or is it incompetence? It has to be intentional, right? Just to walk you through it again. Bernie Sanders, on his stump speech, says 500,000 people a year go bankrupt because of healthcare bills, because of illness, or missed time from work. They go broke, in which case they call bankruptcies. Bernie Sanders is 500,000. Washington Post says, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Yes, let's figure that out. Bernie Sanders is probably lying about this. And they contact the Sanders campaign. The Sanders campaign says, we are using a study in order to make that assertion. So, fact checker, undone it, goes to the author of the study who teaches at Harvard Medical and is in the New York circuit of schools. And he says, yes. He says 66.7% or whatever that number is. He says Sanders may be understating it because really it comes out to be 530,000. But for all intents and purposes, yes, 500,000 works. He had a question. Is it true? He goes to the source. The source says yes. It's a credible source because the guy wrote the article, wrote the article itself that was in a journal, meaning the study that Sanders is pulling it from. That guy answers yes. He's telling the truth. And the Washington Post fact checker goes with this. Yeah, there's no bias at all. There's no bias in this at all. Democracy dies in the darkness indeed. Indeed. I disagree with you. It dies in the light of day. Because these are the things and the articles that you're publishing in the light of day. People can see it. It's not things that are happening in the shadows. You're publishing this. It is going into people's eyeballs, which means light is bouncing off of it. That means you're not in the darkness. You're in the light of day being this bad. Your light of day being this bad. This is pathetic even for the Washington Post. 3 Pinocchios. The Pinocchio thing is stupid, by the way. Just so you know, if you didn't. People might have been too nice to tell you. I'll tell you. I'll be honest with you. The Pinocchio thing is stupid. It's childish. And beyond it being stupid and childish, I have certain bad thoughts about the fact checker who would put something as ludicrous out there like that. You have the gall to go to the source. And for the source to tell you the yes, and then for you to split hairs and come up with this nonsense. Are you serious? And by the way, why don't you talk to somebody else who's also on your same newspaper that is saying what Sanders said was true? Sad. These guys are supposed to be a paper of record. They're supposed to be the paper of record. When Sanders points out the media is biased, think of this. Think of the clips of Maddow. Think of Axelrod. Think of CNN. Think of all that stuff. When he tells you that these guys are biased and have an agenda, and this is not, objective print. I told you I don't trust people who said they're objective because I don't think it exists. Everybody has put their... You got to orient to something. That poll has to go down somewhere. That poll is not floating in the fucking ether. I don't trust people who try to tell me they're biased. They're trying to con me right off the bat just in the framing of who they are. I hope you understand what I mean by that. And I'll end it here. You as a person, have a certain disposition. There's certain things that you like, dislike, agree with, disagree with, all those things. And so this notion of I'm being objective doesn't entirely apply because you already have certain biases and everything built into you. You're being objective from your own vantage point. But that is your vantage point, meaning you're not objective in and of itself. The media is no different in this case. They put their stake in the ground, they tie a rope around themselves, and they go out. And just like a person who says they're objective, the media does the exact same thing, even though it has a perspective of the world. But again, the framing of it is flawed in and of itself because the framing of it assumes that that objectivity A exists, and B, that they're whatever that particular thing is. They frame themselves that whatever comes out of them has to be, by extension, objective information and kind of the middle of the road because they themselves are relaying it. And you've already agreed to the fact that they're objective. I don't accept the premise in and of itself. And it's stuff like this that makes me more confident in that premise. Bernie Sanders says 500,000 people go bankrupt each year for medical bills. The Washington Post fact checker wants to take this air out of Bernie Sanders' sails. So it says, all right, where are you getting this from? Bernie Sanders tells them, we get this from a medical journal. Great. He goes to the medical journal. He goes to the author, a doctor who teaches at Harvard, part of the Cooney network of hospitals, meaning he's credible, says 66,000 bankruptcies accounts say it has to do with medical bills or not having cash during an illness. He tells them what Bernie Sanders said is right. Yes. He goes away and he prints the following article that you are seeing on your screen and gives Bernie Sanders 3 Pinocchios. However, his own newspaper, because the ludicrous nature of this particular article headline, after the person who literally wrote the article tells him that what Sanders said is true. And if he wanted, he could have even went to his own newspaper because his own newspaper comes out with the exact same thing. Washington Post. Litter. Just litter. Just use it for your dog. Because I'm not sure what else you can use for at this point. That's sad. That's pathetic. There is no reason that should have been on this newspaper. Honestly, it discredits itself in publishing something like this. And yet, here it is. But hey, no bias. No bias. No bias. I'll leave it here. Wow. That's astonishing. I'm astonished by that. Honestly, I didn't have large trust in Washington Post's credibility on this front, but that even goes beyond the low regard I even have for Washington Post. I'll leave it here. Like and share.